All right, we are live. Hello and welcome to another Goalline webinar. My name is Amanda Vellutini, and we are going to talk about preparing for a season in today's webinar. As we wait for some folks to get in, I'll just mention a couple of the usual housekeeping items here. So the webinar is recorded. You will receive a copy of the recorded webinar as soon as it's over. That should come to you automatically via email, and that's whether or not you're here attending live or not. So you should have the recording right away as soon as the webinar is over. There are no audio options available in the webinar. However, there is a chat, and I am taking a look at the chat. So if you have any questions as we go along, you can feel free to drop your questions in there. If I know I'm going to come to it later, I'll address it as we get to it. Otherwise, I'll pause occasionally and just make sure that we're addressing all of the questions that are in there. Goalline does have a great support team available to help you out by phone, live chat, and email. So any questions that you have after today's webinar about something that you've seen or something that you're trying based on what you learned today, you can always reach out to the Goalline support team. Various methods to do that, but you'll find that your admin control panel options up here, your user menu is going to have an option for you to go and check out the FAQ or the support center, as well as our webinar landing page. We also have a Goalline YouTube channel where all of the webinars, whether you signed up for them in the past or not, are put up on our Goalline YouTube page. So you can search that on YouTube and take a look at any of the previous webinars that we've put on. So with all of that out of the way, as I said, today we are going to talk about preparing your season with Goalline. Whether it's your first season or your 10th season, there are some tasks that have to be done before you're going to be ready to start adding things like new teams to divisions, rosters and coaches onto teams, practices and games onto schedules. The foundation of Goalline is that your leagues or your rep or association teams are created first. That's part of the very first thing you do when you set up your Goalline site. A lot of times folks will add maybe one or two of those leagues or teams at the very beginning during what we call the auto site setup process. And after that, you may have more that need to be added. So before we start managing a season and schedules, the first thing to make sure is that all of your leagues and divisions are there and all of the rep teams that you have are also listed. You're going to find those options in the scheduling section. So if I click on schedules from my master menu, excuse me. When I click on schedules here, I go to the bodies section of the scheduling tools. And this is where I can add association teams. Goalline uses terminology of association team to represent your rep or travel teams. There's various terminology that gets used for these kind of things, but essentially what these are teams that belong to you as a club or association, but someone else, whether it's on Goalline or not, is managing the league and the standings that are associated with those teams. So if you have a combination of house leagues and travel teams, you're going to use a combination of managing leagues for your house leagues and managing association teams for your travel teams. Your divisions, Goalline uses the word league to represent what you might call a division or a category or a tier. Basically, anytime we have age, skill, and gender that's different, where groups of teams are going to play and have their own standings page, they're going to be a separate league in the Goalline system. The labels you can use on the public side of your site, as you may know, are editable, and you can change what they appear as on the public side. When you're talking about league groupings, you do need to have your league names in place. I have multi-sport on my site here, which means I also select the sport, and then I just give it some demographic information about the age, skill, and gender. The league is where the standings and the schedule for all of the teams in this league is going to live. If the clubs and the teams within this league also come from Goalline organizations, then we have abilities to tie in those schedules so that the schedule information will push and pull, and roster information can push and pull as well. So there's lots of ways to integrate things, but the starting point is to make sure that if you manage leagues where you are responsible for maintaining the standings, all of your divisions would get listed here. So house leagues are a great example, but if you're a league organization or a tournament, you're going to use managed leagues to create all of the divisions that are then going to have teams added to them. Returning out here, just association teams, same idea. You're going to add all of your association teams, and you're going to tell the system whether or not you have more than one team that plays in the same league. So if I have two rep teams that are at U14, or in this case here, I've got three on my list. If they all play, they're all travel teams from my perspective. I don't manage their standings, but they all play in the same division of the same league. Then they would be set up in a way that they're going to play against each other, and I'm going to be able to schedule their games without any scheduling conflicts inside the goal line system. So when I create teams, I make sure that they're sharing the same schedule details and that we can push and pull that same schedule information from wherever the league is giving it to us. That foundation is very important to have in place, and from year to year and season to season, there's not typically a whole lot of changes that are going to happen there. But what you might find is this year, maybe you have enough kids to have two under 14 teams, whereas normally you only had one. The key is to make sure that you add that second team before you go ahead with managing the rest of your season and schedule, just to make the process easier. And the more you do in advance of using managed seasons and schedules, the less times essentially you have to use that tool. I always recommend that you make your structure so that you use managed seasons and managed schedules once per year or once per season if you have two distinct indoor and outdoor or winter and summer style seasons. Soccer is a great example where there's generally two very distinct seasons. One is the outdoor and one is the indoor season. So the managed seasons function might be something that you do twice a year, whereas hockey organizations typically will have one major season and they may have a spring season or a summer season and that type of thing. When it comes to managing your season, the important stuff is to make sure that it is current, meaning that the date range of the season covers today and whatever days we need it to go into the future. And we also need to make sure that when it comes to managing your schedules, that your schedule date range fits within the season. Something I'm often asked about is when it comes to the word season, should you create a separate season for playoffs? And the answer in Goalline is no. Your season in Goalline represents the encompassing season for all of the schedules that are going to exist within the season. And that should include things like preseason, tiering rounds, or any relegation or placement or balancing rounds that you may have as part of your schedule, your regular season, and your playoff schedules. So all of those are schedules that exist within the season. So I'm going to click on manage seasons here, and we're going to take a look at what this form is going to look like. I've got lots and lots of divisions between my leagues and my association teams. So I've got a lot of divisions listed here in my season tool. What I prefer to be able to do is use this tool once per year, and I label my seasons accordingly. My seasons are labeled 2021-22. If you're an indoor, outdoor, or winter, summer kind of organization, it may make sense to have something like 2022 outdoor and then 2022 indoor. Whatever makes sense to you, that you can look through the future and see that there's a convention that can easily be followed. As you can see here, I have divisions that have season information going back all the way as far as 2012. And the season naming convention is consistent throughout. So it makes it nice and easy for myself to remember maybe next year, what should I call my season? But it also helps for a new administrator who might be coming in to fill your shoes down the road. They can easily look at this and say, well, it's pretty obvious that we're going to use a combination of the years that we span here. When you do have a season that covers a season beyond the calendar year, hockey again is a great example, but this doesn't just happen to hockey. Ringette, lacrosse, basketball does this as well. You're going to have a span here, and that's why I prefer to use 2021-22, and I use a very consistent date range for my season as well, because in my organization, I know that all of our schedules are concluded at the end of the spring or maybe in the early summer, and everything starts up again after August. We might start doing registration in August and September, have our teams built up by the end of September, and our games are going to start at the beginning of October. That's kind of a typical Canadian hockey season or ringette season flow of timing. So I want my season date range to be such that I know it's over. Everything's well over by July 31st. But as far as August 1st goes, I've got lots of time to prepare for what's coming next when I start getting player registrations and schedule information ready to go. So looking at the consistent information you can see from your past seasons always helps to shape what that season should be called. I'll call out a couple of things that might sound repetitive to, especially some of you. I recognize some names on here who have been using Goalline for quite some time. So some of this might sound repetitive, but you don't want to use the word season in your season's name. You're going to find that the Goalline system is going to start aggregating the season name and the schedule name and your league name together in a lot of different areas. So you don't need the word season to be there multiple times. If I called this 2021-22 season, Goalline is going to show it as 2021-22 season, regular season in some other places. And that just starts to look a little funny. So using just the numbers that represent the calendar year or year span, and then potentially an indoor, outdoor, or a summer, spring, winter, that kind of notation is also reasonable there. There's times when that might be better to use as part of your schedule name, but we'll look at schedules next and take a look at that. So the name and the date range, obviously very important. And again, I've repeated this many, many times, but your season date range, I always recommend that you start it, and I'm using air quotes like you can see me here, on or before today. And the reason we want to do that is even if I don't need the season to start until next week or next month, if I want to manage the season or start managing things within the system, I want that season date range to be current. Goalline requires your season and schedule to be active so that it understands that you're going to be using those teams or divisions in the current season. If it doesn't recognize that you have them set as active, you're not able to do certain things. And one of the big things you can't do is you cannot assign players to teams that don't have a current active season or schedule. You also may have difficulty adding teams to leagues that don't have a current season or schedule. And you will certainly run into issues if you are trying to use team registration, because team registration does require that your divisions do have an active current season and an active schedule. Very important to have those in place so that the system knows that these teams can be added into those leagues and players can be added onto those rosters. So whatever date range it is that you're starting with should include today's date and should go until the absolute end of all of the activities that happen within that season. And just to reiterate what I said at the top, that includes your playoffs. And we often use the words when we're talking about playoffs, we call it a playoff season. We're in playoff season, but we're in the 2021-22 season. We're just on the playoff schedule. So it's very important to make sure that your season date range goes far enough to cover all of that. Now, in today's world of having seasons having to be paused and go on slight hiatuses and maybe are being extended into maybe the spring, if you'd normally be finished up in March, maybe you're going to April because of some restrictions and shutdowns. Again, having that season date range be a wide date range that you know is not going to run into next season is a good way to go, because then you don't have to make any changes to your season date range. For example, if I was to try to schedule a game for my Women's Hurricane League on August 1st, 2022, the season's not going to be current. I'm not going to be able to create a game on that date because my season doesn't go that far. What I would have to do is I would have to edit my season to extend its date range, and then I would edit my schedule to edit its date range as well to allow games to be scheduled within that. So I guess that's a long way to say you can't schedule anything that happens outside of the season date range, and your schedule date range can also be further restricting. It's pretty common to have schedule date ranges that are a little more restricting than the season so that you don't accidentally schedule things outside of the regular season when you should be doing playoffs, for example. You don't want to have regular season games lingering when your playoffs should be started, because there's some other things that happen when it comes to playoff schedules, and we will get into that shortly here. So we've got our name covered. We've talked about the date range. I always try as well, whenever humanly possible, I want to use the check all option, because this tool is something that I can do once and not have to do it again until it's next season. So this is my maintenance task, but there are times where I'm going to recommend that maybe you do this task a couple of times. I want to check all because everything for me, this is a demo site, which means I can make my season date range whatever I want. But you're not demo sites. You guys have real organizations that have real requirements and real date ranges. You may have a difference in how you want the season rollover behavior to work based on how what leagues and teams you have. And I always relate it to youth and adult as the most obvious examples of why we might have things different for one than the other. The other example is going to be a tournament. So we have associations that are youth and or adult. We have adult only organizations, and we also have tournaments. Because of the way you're going to do things like build rosters, take team registrations, and that type of thing in the next season, you may want your season rollover behavior to be a little bit different. So if I've checked all, everybody's going to have the same behavior. So they're going to get the same season name, the same season date range, and whatever optional settings I place down here or not are going to apply to every single person that I go ahead and apply this season to. The optional settings are available here to account for the adult organizations and the tournament organizations. But before we look at what options those are, let's talk about what will happen if I don't check anything. So the default when I click to manage this season is going to be that every single one of these divisions is going to stay exactly where they are. They are going to have the exact same teams still listed in the managed teams, and all of those same teams are going to be added directly to the season's the schedule details that we add once we manage the season. Every single team that is impacted by this season rollover is going to have all of their coaches and all of their players released from the team. They're not deleted from the Goalline system. They're always going to be in your database, but they are going to be released from their current team. So if you go immediately after performing your season rollover and you go and check on the roster for a team that's in Novice AAA, the teams will have no rosters. This is so that based on new registrations for next season and new tryouts, you're going to be able to place those players onto their next appropriate team. Again, Goalline's leagues and teams stay exactly where they are. So, and a novice is a terrible example because we don't use that terminology anymore. So let's go ahead with U13 AAA. My U13 AAA team is always U13 AAA. The players who are on that team this year are going to be those, 12 and 13-year-old kids. But next year, those 13-year-old kids are going to be in the U15 age category. And so the teams stay exactly where they are with their same demographic information based on age, gender, and skill. But the players are going to get older and they're not going to be applicable to a U13 team. So Goalline doesn't roll teams forward in age or in grade or anything like that. The teams stay exactly as they are. The players are the ones who are going to move throughout seasons, and you have lots of different options for assigning those players. So that's the default. The teams and leagues stay where they are. Players and coaches are released from their teams, and everything about the season's schedule and statistics is archived on to the public side of the site, so you're always still able to go back and look at that historical information. When that default behavior doesn't apply to you, and typically this is for adult organizations where rosters are going to be the same year over year. There may be one or two changes. Maybe I've got a 20-player roster. 2 guys are not going to come back next year, and I've got 1 new guy who's going to register next year. I want that roster to stay the same year over year so that the captain or coach or team manager for that team can manage just the few changes as opposed to having to reassign an entire roster. So that's the use case for keeping the previous active season's team roster into the new season. This is typically something you'd only do for adult organizations because of all the characteristics of the team. The team has demographics, and if the team is an adult rec team, they're always an adult rec team, and the players are generally going to stay the same. Whenever you're dealing with youth, you will generally want that default behavior to be the case. So if I look through my list of divisions, I have a mixture of youth and adult. So instead of check all, what I might do is go through my adult and treat them differently than I treat other divisions. So I might come through and say that I'm going to take all of my women's and my men's and my seniors, and I'm going to keep their roster as I roll the season forward. Then when I repeat the process to do this for my youth divisions, I could easily just say, okay, we're going to do this for all of these guys, and they're going to get the default behavior where the rosters are going to be released. So those are the two main examples of why you would use the keep previous active roster seasons or not. And it's important to note that this is optional, and by default, your rosters will be removed. The history is still there. And just a quick note on how support can help you out should a mistake be made here. We do have the ability to roll your previous season's roster into your new season, even if you didn't check this box, but we can only do that if you have not started to manage the new roster. So if you found that you just rolled your season forward and you accidentally dumped your rosters and you wanted to keep them, contact support right away, and the support team can roll those rosters forward into the new season. As soon as you assign even a single player to that team in the new season, we can no longer roll that entire roster forward for you, and you would probably just need to go through a quick team assignment with either assign multiple players or use the import option to update rosters using an import file. So just to keep that in mind, that we do have a way for you to get those rosters rolled forward if you meant to keep them, but only if they haven't been adjusted at all since the season has been rolled forward. The next optional setting that we see here is to remove the previous active season's teams from the system. I always use the example of tournaments here because tournaments are the most obvious example where you don't want last year's teams to be sticking around in the division when you're trying to manage things like who's actually playing in this tournament this year. The other way to know that whether or not you should probably use this option is if you use team registration to accept teams into the division, then you should remove previous active seasons teams. If you take registrations from each team each year, so a league that requires teams to register and pay their league fee before they can be accepted, that would be a great example of when you might want to remove the previous active seasons teams from the system. Otherwise, they will stay exactly where they are. You can obviously manually remove those teams without any issues. You don't even need to contact support for that. As long as the teams don't have current games and schedules and things, you're not going to have any issues with deleting those teams. But very important to select this when you know that you need new teams to register in the next season. Tournaments, as I said, are the obvious example. The issue that a team would run into if you are using team registration and you do not roll your season forward at removing the teams, you can't have two teams in the same division with the same team name. So what you'll end up having is a team trying to register, and they're going to get an error saying, no, the Renegades are already in this division because they're still there from last year. So they will either contact you and let you know they can't register, or they'll change their team name slightly so that they can get registered. And now that presents an opportunity for some confusion because you'll need to know which one is the actual new active team when it comes to managing your schedules. So using the remove previous active teams definitely for tournaments and then possibly for leagues, depending on whether or not you take registration. If you don't take registration using the Goalline platform, then you can just keep your teams in there and adjust them as needed using the Manage Teams tool. So those are the two optional settings that are here, and we've described what that default behavior is going to look like. And what you're going to see is as soon as you've managed your season, we want you to go ahead and manage your schedules right away. And you should do this immediately so that you don't have any other issues when it comes to trying to manage your seasons. I'm going to hop over to another site just to show you a quick example of how do I know if I need to manage my season? What would I run into if I had a problem? So I'm going to hop into a division here, my U13 Boys A division. This doesn't have a current season. So there is a season, but it's expired now. It ended on December 31st. So I do need a new season if I'm going to start managing this division. And that's a really important thing to note. In this division, I do have a bunch of teams listed here. So I've got a bunch of teams in this division, but we're ready for it to be prepared for next year. This is my tournament demo site. So let's assume I'm going to have another tournament using that division next year. So when I go to manage my season for this particular, that particular division, oh, I clicked on, yeah, there we go. I want to make sure that I'm giving this division its new season for 2022, a date range that goes from either today until when I need it to go to. I'm just going to do it again till December 31st. And when I go to create this season, I want to remove the previous active teams because I want new team registrations on my new form with their new payments and stuff for next year. So I'm going to remove the previous active seasons teams from the system, and it's going to automatically give them a 2022 season. In this example site, I've got multiple seasons and multiple divisions because we run more than one tournament out of this. So as we take a look at that, if I go into manage schedules here now, I can go ahead and create my schedule for U13 Boys A because they have a season, but they don't have a current schedule. As I can see here, my B, they've got a round robin and a playoff schedule. All these guys have round robins and championships, but these ones don't have a new schedule. So I need to create one. Because this is a tournament, I want my first schedule to be called round robin, but that's because my tournament happens to have a round robin schedule before the playoff brackets. If you don't and you go straight into a playoff bracket, it's totally fine to just start with that. Or if the whole thing is standing style, then you can do that as well. If the whole thing is round robin style tournament, you can have your standing style schedule and that be the only one. So down here, we don't have a playoff or championship here. We've just got the round robin portion. It could be that you just have a playoff bracket portion. So a round robin portion over here is the schedule name. And that's going to exist in the season I just created, which was called 2022. I only want to give this to U13 Boys A, but if you're doing this for everyone all at once, then again, that check all button is right there for you. The other things to consider when you're creating your season is going to be whether or not this should be active. Your very first one, after you've clicked Manage Seasons, your first schedule should be either round robin if you're a tournament or regular season if you're anything but a tournament. That schedule should be the one that says, yes, this is active. Whether or not you want to publish it is up to you, and you can always come back and change the published status of your schedules individually, and that includes being able to publish the standings page by itself. So lots of ways for you to manage this later. Very important that the first schedule you create, though, does say yes for it being the active schedule. And this is what's telling the system that now you have a current season and you have a current schedule that is set to be active. Very important for those things. Everything else we have in the schedule details here is going to be sport specific. And so I'm not even sure. I think this is hockey. Yeah, so this is a hockey one. But the default terminology you're going to see in here is going to be based on your sport. So you might see things like periods or halves or quarters based on what your sport is. But these details are all very familiar. The wins, losses, and ties, overtime, shootout, forfeits, those things, all your various point values, so that when we calculate standings, they're calculated based on the point values that are here. Playoff and brackets, point values don't play in quite as much, but they are a factor, especially if you do series and best of sevens or best of threes and whatever you have in the rounds of your playoffs and things. So setting these the various settings in your schedule details, that's going to be really sport specific, really organization specific. And I've got some bells and whistles turned on here that just kind of show off a little bit of what Goalline can do as far as specific points per period. This isn't used very common, but it is possible to manipulate the standings and point values based on specific points per period. Custom points per game as well can be added. We've got different time frames as well. So if you have different lengths, this is something that I know I've seen in Ringette where it's 2 20 minutes and a 5 instead of 3 20-minute periods. So if that's the structure that makes sense for your organization, we can always enable these features here as well. And they're set in those schedule details so that you set it once and then you never really have to go and revisit it. The schedule date range is important as well. Typically, with the regular season schedule, I always recommend that you use the same date range as your season. But if you do manage your own playoffs, it's important to make sure that you're not scheduling games outside of the regular season window so that your playoff standings or your playoff feeding is done at the right time, because until all of your feeding schedule games are reported, your playoff season or your playoff schedule is not going to become immediately active. So when it comes to your schedules, use the correct date range to make sure that you're starting when you need to start and you're ending on the day after you need to schedule your last game of that season. Of that schedule. I'm confusing everyone by using the word season too many times. I'm sorry. So that's a really important factor in here, is making sure that that date range is correct based on when you need games to be scheduled within that specific schedule. From there, you can add additional schedules. So if you want round robin and playoffs, you would go in and say playoffs next, and that's going to be a playoff bracket style. If you're a regular season organization, you're going to create your regular season schedule. You probably also might want an exhibition schedule so that you have a schedule for games that shouldn't count towards the stats and standings of the regular season. This is also where you would go to add in things like preseason, tiering rounds, and things like that, where you may be balancing the teams into different conferences. So creating your schedule, you give it the appropriate name. We give you some teaser text in the box, but you do still have to pick a name. Regular season for leagues and for association teams is typically the first one and the best one to use to get started. And then if you do need additional schedules, you go ahead and create those. Without creating the schedule, you don't have anywhere to place games, and the teams that are in there are not going to be considered active because they won't have an active schedule yet. So that's just a really important thing to make sure that that foundation is in there. Those schedules, from the details, everything else about managing your season is just going to come from add games and report those games. When it comes to building rosters and things like that, there's lots of different ways that you can manage your rosters. Things like registration, where they assign themselves directly to their team, or assign multiple players, where coaches and managers and conveners get together and make sure that they allot players to the appropriate teams. You can also use a player import to update player records with their current team for the new season. And you can assign players manually one at a time just through the Find Player tool. So lots of different ways to accomplish your roster building. Depending on what method makes the most sense for you as an organization. So we've created our season and we've looked at all the options. We've created a schedule, and now we can go ahead and start looking at how would I get games and practices in there. As you can see here, we've got a few really good options right in front of us. Uploading a schedule file is a really popular method, especially for association teams, to get their schedules into Goalline if their league is not also using Goalline. If their league's using Goalline, you don't have to upload a schedule. We can tie you in so that your schedule automatically just shows up on your team pages and any calendar subscriptions that your parents and players may have. So uploading a schedule file, we do have some sample spreadsheets down here. It does have to be in a CSV format, but the order of columns and things like that is not super important. There's definitely some really good, really important information that needs to be in the file. So once you take a look at the spreadsheets, the samples that are available, it's just pretty obvious information. You need the teams, where and when, which schedule is it going to? So, because as we just looked, you might have an exhibition schedule and a regular season schedule. And then you might be uploading practices too. So when you're uploading the schedule name, you want to make sure that you include the correct name and what division it's for and that kind of thing. So adding games using schedule upload, this is a tool that's available at the master menu where we're located now. It's also available in your league control panels, and it's also available in your association team control panels. The difference being from here, I can upload games and practices for every single one of these leagues and these teams. As soon as I drill down into a league or a team specific menu, it has to include that league or that specific team. But it can still be games and practices all in the same file. So it's nice and easy to get a schedule upload happening there. The other method, of course, is to add games one at a time. And again, this tool and feature is available at all 3 layers of the menu. The difference is I'll click on it from here at the master menu. The first thing I have to do is what division do I want to schedule for? So I'm going to select from the divisions that I have available in here, and I'll say, okay, I'm going to schedule it for my men's harbor league. There's multiple, or here's my regular season schedule. If there are multiple, I can choose from which one it's going to be added to, and then I select it. Now I can go ahead and add a game between the teams that exist in that division. Adding games one at a time, you just pick your teams, venue, date, time. Your duration here is going to default based on your schedule details that you entered when you created the schedule. So I've got a 75-minute default for hockey. A lot of times we would see 60. For soccer, a lot of times it's going to be 105 minutes. Sometimes less. Referees don't like it when it's less. If you got 45-minute halves, you need some time for that. So just making sure that you have the right allotted venue time, and this can be changed from the default. Game details can also be added. These are entirely optional. So what's not optional, of course, is teams, venues, dates, and times, unless you want to do a TBA option up here, in which case you just don't select the game time. But it will show up on the game date, and whatever venue is selected here, it's just not going to have a time specific to that game. So folks are not going to know when is that game, and you would edit that game later. The other thing to point out in here is that with leagues, you are able to do games that are between TBA. And I point this out a lot, mostly to point out you do not have to create a team in your system called TBA. Goalline provides a TBA option in the schedule options. You can upload TBA games as well if you don't know what teams are going to be participating. But if you don't know what teams are going to participate because it's a playoff schedule, there are better methods than using TBA on a standing style schedule. So that's something where you would want to use the playoff style schedule, and you're going to base your TBA games on the placements, and you don't have to have a finished regular season schedule or any finished standings in order to make that work, as far as preparing that playoff schedule well in advance. There's other options in here, and the other one that I'll point out is being able to communicate that game to the division, to the folks who need to know. So I'm at the master menu, which means I can send this information out to any of the leagues and teams. But the further down into the menus I am, the more restricted these options are. But at the very least, I can email the parents, players, and coaching staff that are involved in this game to make sure that they know that that the game has been added to the schedule. This is also going to show up if we're editing a game. So I'm going to be able to edit a game, make some changes, and then send that change out as an email to the players and parents and coaches while I update it, and it updates on the schedule. So that's creating a game one at a time. And then if I take a look here, let's look at practices. Practices can be added one at a time here. They can be added at various menus. It's really popular for organizations to add practices at the master menu level, because you can add practices for any and all teams that exist in the organization, regardless of whether they're rep teams or teams that belong in a league or division. The benefit of doing it from this step or this area is that you do see all of the teams. And whenever you are sharing field time or ice time amongst more than one team for practices, you can do that very easily using the tools in here. So again, we need to pick a venue, a date, and a time. And then we have to make a selection here for practice type. If it's full venue, then that's just one team at a time, no exceptions. Half venue is the opposite. It's two teams, but only up to two teams. And then we do have this shared venue option. This is pretty popular for really young age groups, the Timbit soccer and the IP and feathers hockey. That there's going to be maybe 6 or 7 different groups on the ice all at the same time, or 6 different groups on the soccer field at the same time for some Timbit soccer. So you can use the shared venue here. You create the practice. I can create a shared practice by using the control option and selecting both teams that are going to share. And then when I create this practice, it's going to create it for both of those teams on both of their schedules right away. I can also, another benefit of doing this at the master menu level at the beginning of a season is I can set up their recurring practices. Really lucky organizations have very consistent practice times for their teams. So if you are lucky enough to have consistent times every Tuesday at 6 o'clock at this field, this is when we practice, you can easily set up a weekly recurring practice that recurs every however many until a specific date. And then one action of creating this one practice will actually create a practice for my team 1 and 2 as a shared practice on their venue at their specific date and time every week until the end of the schedule. So I don't have to come in and do this a million times. I can just add it once, and now they're sharing that practice time. And then I'm always able to come in and make an edit to those individual practices later, and it doesn't have an impact necessarily on the remaining recurring practices. Same thing as like your calendar. If you're updating a recurring meeting, do you want to update all of them or just this one? And so if I want to make changes, I can just remove the recurring option here, make a specific change to this one practice, and it only applies to this and doesn't impact the rest of those practices that were set up as recurring. So getting practices and games in one at a time or through upload is nice and easy. Another method that is used for getting schedules into the system is going to be using the schedule generator. This is available at the league level for any standing style schedule. So if I hop into my women's league here, we'll take a look, go down to the scheduling section, and I can generate a schedule. Using the generate schedule option is best when you do have a really good idea of all of your time slots in advance. And there's different ways that Goalline can help out when it comes to how to get those time slots in. If you deal exclusively with time slots and you don't ever want to schedule anything just ad hoc, like what we were just looking at, we can make it so that only time slots are available. So instead of being able to click add, edit, delete games and pick a venue and a time, it's going to say, okay, pick a venue, and then we'll give you some time slots you can choose from. And if there are none, you can't schedule it, or you have to talk to whoever adds the time slots to your site for you so that you would be able to select it. So time slots can be something that we can do a lot with, and they are helpful, but they're mostly helpful for organizations that do basically, with your city or your municipality or your province, wherever it is that you book your venue time. If you book off all of those blocks for your season at the beginning, you can easily add all of those in advance. But if you have to kind of piecemeal them throughout the season, it may not be ideal to use time slots, especially not as a restrictive option. Using the generate schedule option, it does require the use of time slots, but you don't have to be locked down to time slots. You can just use them for the purpose of the schedule that it is that you want to put in. If I go over to my time slots section over here, for example, it just lists all of the venues that we have available and on what time slots I might have in there. So at this one here, I have one time slot available. If I look through, I've got lots of time slots at the Eastlink Center and at Coal Harbour Place, Scotia 1 and 2. So if I need to create a schedule here, I should have more than enough time slots available. But as they get used, they're now reduced for other divisions that I might be running my schedule generator for. So preparing a season, a lot of times you're going to be prioritizing your venue time slots, whether that's soccer venues or ice times amongst all of your teams and leagues. So you'll want to make sure that you're distributing those in a way that makes sense. So we can talk to you about time slots if that's something that works for your organization. Otherwise, you do your dates and times. And the Goalline system in any event is always going to be checking for conflicts either with the team or with the venue. So you're not going to ever create for yourself a scheduling conflict, but using time slots sometimes can help prevent a scheduling conflict with another organization or another, a completely different sport that might show up at the same field as you to play a soccer game, or you're there to play soccer and someone shows up to play ultimate frisbee and the field has been double booked, right? So using time slots does have a tendency to help mitigate those types of issues. So managing your games and practices once you've got them in the system, just as easy as add, edit, delete games or add, edit, delete practices in here, and you're able to go ahead and make individual changes. You can view your master schedule in here and export the schedule. You can also view the master schedule, including games and practices for not just one division, but all of the divisions. So a little bit similar to what we see on the public side with the master schedule, but in here you can actually export that schedule and you can select whatever date range it is that you want there. And that can be exported to a CSV formatted file. So the last thing that we'll talk about is going to be team attendance options. So now that we've created our season and schedule, we've got games and practices up there. When we have games and practices, your coaches and managers want to know who's coming, who's not coming, and if they have any other questions, maybe what other questions might you need to ask. Luckily, we're in a lot of parts of Canada, we're getting away from having to do COVID screening and things like that. So that's maybe less of a requirement. But when it comes to team attendance, you still just need to know who's showing up, who's not going to be there. So when I select a team in here to go for team attendance, I can edit the team attendance options so that we can have some automatic team attendance emails. And that way everyone is automatically going to be required to answer whether or not they're in or out. The automatically scheduled emails option by default is not going to be checked. So until someone goes in and sets it up for the team, it's not going to be turned on. Once it is turned on, you have the choice of what do you want that default value to be? Do you want it to be, I don't know, or we assume you're in unless you tell me otherwise, or we assume you're out until you tell me otherwise. So it's up to you how you want to make that assumption. And then you can choose whether or not players are allowed to add a comment when they submit their team attendance to you. And you can also choose to ask an additional question. Adult organizations often have who's bringing the beer, or it could be a carpool question. Do you need a ride to the game, or anything like that? So lots of different things that might come in here. COVID screening is one thing that could go in there, but if that's not necessary anymore, you've got that available, or you just don't have to ask it at all. The frequency of the emails is also set up in here, so it can go out as many as two times, where 0 is game day. So if I only wanted to go out on, let's say I wanted to go out 5 days before the game, and then I wanted to go out on game day, it's going to be that I want 5 and 0. So if you haven't answered me by game day, you're going to get another email saying, are you coming or not? If as an organization, you'd prefer to know that the day before, then we can do maybe 5 days and then 1 day. So 1 day is the day before the game. Sending the email to the parents is always recommended. By default, it will only go to the player. Youth organizations tend to use the parent email as the player email, but just in case that's not the case for you, make sure that you're selecting that, yes, we do want to send this to the first and the second parent or guardian that you have in that profile. Once we have the attendance options set up here, you save those options and it will automatically send the team attendance email for every game and every practice for the rest of the season. And then you're able to look at that on a upcoming or past basis and see in the past what was our team attendance. I don't do this for a demo site here, so we can see that nobody answered any of my questions, and I can resend the email manually if I really need to. So especially, if nobody's answered me yet, I can send the email manually, and it's only going to send it to the people who are checked. Anyone who interacted with the team attendance would be unchecked by default because we have an answer, but then I can resend that team attendance email out. So as I noted, when you create games and practices, you can send an email to them. You can edit games and practices and send an email as well. And then we also have the built-in team attendance tool. We also have email communication tools at the team and league level and the master menu. So there's ways for you to just generally send an email or a text announcement to the recipients that you want to send that to. When I'm in a league menu, I am restricted to the teams that exist in the league that I'm in. So I can send this to players and parents and coaches. Coaches that have any title, or maybe just coaches that have a manager title, and then email subscription lists, website administrators as well, which are kind of general for the whole site. And then I can also select one or more specific teams. So by default, we select all, but I could just say I only need to send this to the Blizzard and the Cadbury Cadets. And by doing that, I'm using the control key to select all of those. Your executive listing, if you have one on your site, will also be listed here, and they're always going to be available to send any communications to that are going through the system. So you'll have that option to send and save a email announcement from any of those menus. You do have to have permission to use the email tool in order to send the email or text announcement, but you will, if you have the ability to edit games and practices, you will be able to absolutely send an email as you edit that game or practice. So that is just the general covering of seasons and schedules and what you need to set up to get that ready for the season. Then we have our how to get games and practices in there, and how to manage your team attendance and other communication. Great question in the chat about hockey setting up their own venues. So Tom, that question, because that is a specific requirement of hockey organizations in the province of Nova Scotia. So that restriction doesn't exist across the Goalline platform, just as a general rule. That is something that was put in place specifically here in the province of Nova Scotia. I happen to be in Nova Scotia myself. So that is a restriction that doesn't apply to the Goalline platform in general, and that's something that I think I'll look to reach out to you there and just check in on some things, because that is a restriction that applies to hockey associations in Nova Scotia only, and we can certainly discuss the implications of that. Generally speaking, adding venues is available in the schedule tools for all Goalline organizations, and there's not really any other requirements that happen there. Now, if you are an organization using Goalline and you're also using the referee tools or umpire tools, anybody using our advanced official system to assign officials to games, it is important to make sure that your venue listing is accurate, and I'm trying to think of like the right word to say, like it's got to be really tight, because you want to make sure you don't have any duplicate versions of the venue. And for context and history, the main reason that we have implemented the ability to lock down venues on certain organizations that have networks and tie-ins on Goalline is to prevent the potential of duplicate venues. And my main example is the Cole Harbour Place, but there's definitely lots of these examples. Is that the Cole Harbour Place is a facility that has two rinks in it. The rinks are called Scotia 1 and Scotia 2. And so if we have 10 organizations using Goalline that all play in some way, shape, or form out of the Cole Harbour Place on one of those two venues, but each organization calls it something slightly different, there's potential for scheduling conflicts that Goalline cannot catch. If the venue is named something different, so I have named it CHP Scotia 1, but I've seen it Cole Harbour Place S1, or fully written out Cole Harbor Place, Scotia One. So there's lots of different variations and acronyms and abbreviations, and instances where it's really possible to create scheduling conflicts that the system can't catch if it doesn't recognize that the venues actually are the same. If, for another example, using Cole Harbor Place, sometimes I see it where it's literally just Scotia 1 and Scotia 2. And so no reference to the Cole Harbor Place portion of the title of the venue. So there's a really good reason for that venue lockdown, but I think there's also a really good reason to have a conversation about that, Tom, for going forward on the Goalline platform, just to open that up a little bit, depending on what requirements are still there. When you do use the Goalline referee platform, having your venues be very consistent is important so that referees can choose their appropriate venue preferences if that's allowed for them by their referee assigners, and b we would know if there are scheduling conflicts that occur from that when we have the referee system involved, because all games, even if you're not tied in for schedules with your league, we can have lots of different organizations sending games to the same referee association, assigning those games. So there's a really important factor when it comes to having your venues in the system correctly, and avoiding the potential for error when it comes to scheduling games at different venues. So keep that in mind as you're scheduling as well. I guess that is something that's important in preparing for a season. Not all of us are lucky enough to have new rinks and new fields and things like that to add to our venue listing on a regular basis, but it is always a good idea to check that out from time to time. So I think in my FAQ, I've got a little checklist that I put together. If you go to the FAQ and check this out, so season rollover checklist, one of the things to think about is, are there new venues in your area? Here in Cole Harbor, Nova Scotia, 2 years ago, we got a new soccer turf, and so that is a new venue that needs to be added, because you can't schedule games and practices at a venue that's not in the system to schedule. So taking a look at the new venues in your area periodically around your season rollover time is the perfect time to take a look at that. And then your choices on your season rollover and the naming conventions there, and then whether or not you're using online registration, or is it also time to copy registration forms forward and that type of thing. So hopefully that answers your question, Tom. I do encourage. I think I'll reach out to you probably tomorrow there and see if we can discuss that a little bit further, just more specifically for hockey in Nova Scotia here. So that concludes today's webinar. A couple of minutes early for a change. Normally I'm a little over, so I will hang out if there are any other questions related to anything that we talked about here today. And again, a reminder: Goalline support team is available, phone, live chat, and email cases there. And we also have our webinars recorded on our YouTube channel, and a great FAQ that you can search for more information. Oh, hi, Barb. Didn't see you on there on the list when I first got started there. Great to see you. All right. Thanks again, everybody. Have a wonderful day.